Up next, Mike Emanuel in for Bret.
Thank you, Kimberly. This is a Fox News alert. I'm Mike Emanuel in for Bret Baier. We have two major breaking stories tonight. The FBI is admitting it failed to follow up on a tip that virtually predicted this week's Florida school shooting and even named the teenager now suspected of the deadly rampage. And here in Washington, the special counsel in the investigation of alleged Russian interference in the 2016 election is showing some of his cards tonight. 13 Russian nationals and 3 Russian companies have been charged in an elaborate plot to use social media and the internet to damage the American political system. The indictment says some of that activity was aimed at assisting the Trump presidential campaign. However, the president is once again declaring that the finding shows there was no collusion between his campaign and the Russians. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is at the Justice Department tonight with details. Good evening, Catherine.
Well, thank you, Mike. The news conference here at Main Justice was called with just 45 minutes notice. The indictment is powerful new evidence of a Russian plot, but does not name any American co-conspirators.
The defendants allegedly conducted what they called information warfare against the United States.
With direct oversight of the Russia Special Counsel probe, the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein said 13 Russian nationals and 3 Russian organizations were charged with, quote, conspiracy to defraud the United States and illegally using social media to divide Americans and disrupt the 2016 presidential election.
The Russian conspirators want to promote discord in the United States and undermine public confidence in democracy.
As early as 2014, the 37-page indictment alleges the Russian defendants, including Yevgeny Prigozhin, a businessman with deep ties to Russian President Vladimir Putin, and their co-conspirators, began planning the operation from their base in St. Petersburg, Russia. The indictment says, quote, by early to mid-2016, defendants' operations included supporting the presidential campaign of then-candidate Donald J. Trump and disparaging Hillary Clinton. The defendants bought server space in the U.S. to create a virtual private network to hide the operation's Russian roots.
They used stolen or fictitious American identities, fraudulent bank accounts, and false identification documents. The defendants posed as politically and socially active Americans, advocating for and against particular candidates.
The indictment alleges that Russian operatives made contact with members, volunteers, and supporters of the Trump campaign. They were unnamed in the charge sheet. The Deputy Attorney General was asked if campaign officials were duped.
Now, there is no allegation in this indictment that any American was a knowing participant in this illegal activity. There is no allegation in the indictment that the charged conduct altered the outcome of the 2016 election.
The Russian operatives allegedly sought to hurt the candidacy of Trump's challengers, including Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, and they allegedly aimed to bolster Hillary Clinton's challenger, Bernie Sanders. After the election, special counsel investigators found Russian operatives played both sides.
For example, the defendants organized one rally to support the president-elect and another rally to oppose him, both in New York on the same day.
Asked by Fox News whether the Russian government would cooperate in any future prosecution.
Have you had any assurances from the Russians that they will provide these individuals for prosecution?
There's been no communication with the Russians about this. We'll follow the ordinary process of seeking cooperation and extradition.
Also today, a California man pled guilty to selling bank account numbers to nationals outside of the United States between 2014 and 2017. A spokesman for the special counsel said they had no evidence the man was a knowing or witting participant in the Russian plot. Mike?
Catherine Herridge leading us off at the Justice Department tonight. Catherine, thanks very much. The White House is claiming vindication again in the wake of the indictments. Correspondent Kevin Corke is outside the president's Florida compound tonight. Good evening, Kevin.
Evening there, Michael. This has been a very interesting day. We've been watching all the developments, as you can well imagine, not just based on what we saw from Rod Rosenstein, but also based on what we remember the president had to say about the Russia investigation, not too terribly long ago.
Do you feel vindicated, Mr. President?
While the president did not respond to shouted questions on camera this afternoon about the revelations that more than a dozen Russian operatives were engaged in an effort to interfere with the 2016 election, he did take to Twitter to weigh in. Russia started their anti-U.S. campaign in 2014, long before I announced that I would run for president. The results of the election were not impacted. The Trump campaign did nothing wrong. No collusion. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein said today the investigation into possible collusion is ongoing, but he also said nothing in today's indictment indicated any Americans knowingly took part in the Russian scheme. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the White House press secretary, issued a statement. It read in part, President Donald J. Trump has been fully briefed on this matter and is glad to see the special counsel's investigation further indicates that there was no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia and that the outcome of the election was not changed or affected. Previously, Mr. Trump called the investigation a witch hunt, even tweeted once that it was a, quote, hoax. But tonight there is proof that there was an effort by the Russians to interfere in our election, even if so far there's been no proof that anyone involved with the Trump campaign had anything to do with it. Also tonight, Mike, we have learned that White House Chief of Staff John Kelly has made major changes to the way the White House will handle security clearance investigations in the future. We learned about this today. It's a five-page document, and it basically lays out the overhaul in this way. It says it's going to require the DOJ and the FBI to do more to follow up on ongoing investigations. We are told that Don McGahn, the White House Chief Counsel, also helped to write this overhaul alongside John Kelly. Again, this is a bit of a fallout from the Rob Porter circumstance, of course, the former White House staff secretary, who, of course, was fired not terribly long ago, Mike.
No question about that. Kevin Cork live in West Palm Beach, Florida. Kevin, many thanks. A stunning revelation. The FBI is admitting it mishandled a very specific tip about Nicholas Cruz, the 19-year-old accused of murdering 17 people at a high school earlier this week. Someone warned the Bureau last month of almost exactly what happened Wednesday afternoon. The warning was ignored, the second tip from a member of the public about Cruz that failed to prevent the massacre. That revelation comes as the funerals begin for some of the victims. Correspondent Phil Keating is at the shooting scene in Parkland, Florida. Good evening, Phil.
Good evening, Mike. Warning flags were flying high and flying for a very long time, specifically about the 19-year-old former student of Stoneman Douglas High School behind me, now accused of 17 counts of first-degree murder. Just about an hour ago, Broward County Sheriff said over the past few years, his office received 20 calls for service specifically about Cruz and his behavior at the time. He says such calls for service in the future will now be far more well scrutinized. Also at the FBI and Justice Department today, a stunning public admission.
2 days after the worst high school shooting in U.S. history, a massacre the FBI was warned could happen, the agency now admits it failed to properly handle a January 5th tip from a person close to Nicholas Cruz about the suspect's gun ownership and his alleged desire to kill people, specifically to carry out a school shooting. That should have been forwarded up as a potential threat to life to the Miami field office. It was not. 5 weeks later, 17 students and teachers are dead.
On behalf of myself and over 1,000 employees of the Miami field office, we truly regret any additional pain that this has caused.
In an equally rare slap from the Attorney General to his FBI, Jeff Sessions released a highly critical admonition. Quote, "It is now clear that the warning signs were there and tips to the FBI were missed. We see the tragic consequences of those failures." And Florida Governor Rick Scott taking the outrage even further. Quote, "The FBI's failure to take action against this killer is unacceptable. 17 innocent people are dead, and acknowledging a mistake isn't going to cut it. The FBI director needs to resign." Also, in September, the FBI was unable to trace the source of an internet post by someone with the same name as the suspect, writing, "I'm going to be a professional school shooter." And Broward County Sheriff now clarifying what the alleged killer brought with him.
The killer never was in possession of a gas mask or any type of smoke grenades.
The former student expelled last year for disciplinary reasons, 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz, remains held without bond.
He's remorseful. He is fully aware of what is going on. And he's just a broken human being.
Emotions and politics continue to dominate this affluent community, while across the country, schools and police are dealing with copycat threats. Most have been social media hoaxes. And the devastation caused by the shooting for the community led several thousand people to gather together Thursday night at the Parkland Amphitheater for an emotional candlelight vigil. This student lost a close friend.
I think that he would appreciate what we're doing, and I think that people would want him to remember in a positive way.
And just out tonight by the Florida Sun-Sentinel, quoting Nicholas Cruz's public defender, Cruz is now agreeing to plead guilty to first-degree murder, 17 counts of that for killing 14 students, a teacher, a high school football coach, and an athletic director, all in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. And also the freshman building, the three-story structure on campus where all of the killing happened, will now be demolished so that none of the surviving students and teachers will ever have to walk past those classrooms of carnage again. Mike.
Our Phil Keating live in Parkland, Florida after a heartbreaking week there. Phil, thanks very much. Let's get some analysis now from George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley. Good evening, sir.
Thanks, Mike.
Let's start with the indictments. Was that a warning shot fired by the U.S. government at Moscow?
Well, it was quite a shot. I don't know if it was a warning or below the waterline. It's clearly, if you read between the lines, it's clearly saying that this was a Russian government operation. It didn't spontaneously happen that you have dozens of people involved in a hacking operation with elaborate disguisings of their groups, their identities. It's suggesting that I think this is a government operation. Now, that points to Vladimir Putin. Right. What's interesting is that it doesn't really point to Donald Trump. That despite the dozens of pages, there's one word that is likely to be cited in this whole story, and that is unwitting. That is, the adjective unwitting appears in the indictment to describe Trump officials who had contacts with these Russians. They say that they didn't know that they were Russians. But what's fascinating is that it doesn't suggest that they have evidence of collusion. And this was brought out by Rosenstein.
Actually, we have that soundbite. Let's go to it if we can.
There is no allegation in this indictment that any American was a knowing participant in this illegal activity. There is no allegation in the indictment that the charged conduct altered the outcome of the 2016 election.
So your analysis of that point?
Well, you know, that's what's fascinating. It's been a year with multiple plea agreements, a lot of testimony, a lot of interviews, and they're saying that they still don't have any evidence of any knowing engagement with the Russians involved in this effort. That has to be good news to the Trump White House. It's also notable that the meeting in Trump Tower isn't mentioned. You know, they knew those were Russians, but if they were part of this effort, there would be some reference. Their identity was clear, and yet that is also not mentioned.
Is some of this basically saying to the folks behind us on Capitol Hill and around the country that want some answers about this and want some action taken about what happened to our election in 2016, that serious people are on the case and taking steps to address this?
I think it does. I think that there's a truth that comes out of this. That this makes more sense than the narratives that everyone's been throwing around in conspiracies. This began in 2014, began before the presidential election. The Russians were taking targets of opportunity, and they were shooting at everybody in the election, but they were certainly working more against Hillary Clinton. But what it does show is that they did a really quite impressive job in finding this cyber trail to these individuals. Right. And this is not over. I mean, these are individuals that are going to have serious problems because they've been tagged.
Let's switch gears to the devastating story, Parkland, Florida. The FBI says it got a warning, dropped the ball. Your reaction to that?
You know, I don't agree with Governor Scott that Director Wray should resign. I don't think that that's in any way responsive. There's no indication that he had a direct involvement in this. We need people to find out the truth to this. But there's a serious problem. You can't tell people see something, say something, something if the next line is do nothing? You know,
right.
it really undermines what the FBI has been working for years to try to get people to do. So there has to be some accountability here and some really explanation, because when you read the level of detail that was given to the FBI, it's breathtaking that anyone on the other side of that phone wouldn't go, oh my God, and immediately start to rally people to get on this. It sounds like it just went into a drawer and was left there.
Here's the explanation from the FBI. Let's take a listen.
The caller provided information about Nicholas Cruz and the potential of him becoming a school shooter. Under normal protocol, this information should have been provided to the Miami field office. Their appropriate investigative steps would have been taken. The FBI has determined that protocol was not followed.
You've been around this town a long time. Should somebody go for this?
Quite frankly, I think someone should be fired for this. It's not Ray, but we have to find out who was responsible. The FBI has been accused of not sharing information in the past with local authorities. That's a big gripe that you hear from a lot of prosecutors, investigators. But this one is far, far more serious. Nobody receiving that information could just view this as one more call about some kid saying stupid things. This was detailed and this was imminent.
Professor Turley.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks for your time and analysis. We appreciate it. When we come back, the Senate's gone home after failing to get anything accomplished on immigration. Now it's the House's turn. Mitt Romney's running for the U.S. Senate seat in Utah. The former Massachusetts governor who ran against and lost to President Obama in 2012 is already being called a carpetbagger. But correspondent Alicia Cunha tells us tonight from Salt Lake City, Romney still appears to be the favorite in the Senate race.
Governor Mitt Romney's made it official. He is running to fill retiring Senator Orrin Hatch's seat. Standing on an ice rink reminiscent of his achievement to bring the 2002 Salt Lake Winter Olympics out from scandal, and in his video announcement, he took a couple shots.
Utah welcomes legal immigrants from around the world. Washington sends immigrants a message of exclusion. And on Utah's Capitol Hill, people treat one another with respect. I have decided to run for United States Senate because I believe I can help bring Utah's values and Utah's lessons to Washington.
The former presidential nominee polls extremely well in Utah. His family has been a part of the state for generations. Romney's former vice presidential running mate, Speaker Paul Ryan, quickly signaled his support, releasing a statement reading in part, quote, "Our party and our country are always better off when Mitt is engaged, and I know that he will put his unparalleled experience, conservative leadership, and lifetime of service to work for Utah." The Democratic candidate released a video highlighting Romney's life outside Utah. Jenny Wilson says she relates to the voters who want to change Washington.
When you see the Trump voters step up saying enough is enough, I can relate to that. We don't want government to be so far away from us, so removed from our community. Mitt Romney represents more of that.
The Democratic National Committee jumped in too with a statement in part reading, while Mitt Romney desperately wants to separate himself from the extremism of the current administration, the basic policies of Trump's GOP, whether it's tax cuts for the rich or reversing the progress of the ACA, were his before they were Donald Trump's. Important to remember, should he win, Mitt Romney won't be your average freshman senator, as one Utah Political reporter put it. He walks in with a very large microphone. Mike.
Alicia Cunha on an attempted political comeback by Mitt Romney. There are new accounts tonight of alleged affairs involving then-businessman Donald Trump going back several years. The New Yorker reports Mr. Trump had a sexual relationship with a former Playboy Playmate of the Year after meeting her in 2006. Not longer after his marriage to his current wife, Melania. The story also alleges encounters with other women. A White House spokesperson told the magazine the story is fake news, and the president denies the relationship with the former Playmate. President Trump is blaming Democrats for the failure so far of efforts to come up with immigration legislation that addresses the fate of the so-called Dreamers. Correspondent Peter Ducey tells us where things stand right now. Hello, Peter.
Hi, Mike. Now it is the House's turn to tackle immigration, and the most buzz is linked to a package authored by Republican Congressman Bob Goodlatte, which addresses border security, chain migration, and the visa lottery, but it does not include a pathway to citizenship for Dreamers.
We took a whip check. The whip check was positive, and we're now working on the people who whipped back that they were undecided to make sure that we have the necessary support. We're prepared to make some more tweaks to the bill if necessary.
Now that senators have returned home for recess without a DACA fix, President Trump has tweeted this, quote, "Cannot believe how badly DACA recipients have been treated by the Democrats. Totally abandoned. Republicans are still working hard." That tweet got a response from the Democratic whip, Senator Dick Durbin, who says this in part, quote, "Give me a break. You killed DACA and have now rejected 6 bipartisan deals to protect Dreamers. I've been fighting for Dreamers for 17 years and will never abandon them." And across the Capitol in the House, Democratic Congresswoman Michelle Lujan Grisham is now warning, quote, "Now because Trump sabotaged the process of the bipartisan legislation, we'll continue to see this crisis worsen as Dreamers continue to lose their jobs and others are detained and deported." It does appear the March 5th deadline President Trump gave Congress to fix DACA may be moving back while the administration fights with federal judges who say the president can't cancel the program. And some lawmakers think their colleagues welcome the delay.
The bottom line is, this also tells me that maybe what's going on here behind the scenes, they don't want to solve it. Democrats, Republicans, they want to keep it alive as a campaign issue.
A so-called sweet spot on immigration, according to Republican Senator John Thune, could be a stripped-down deal that just addresses the 2 big-ticket items, DACA and border security. But there is no deal like that yet. Mike?
Our Peter Ducey after Immigration Week in the United States Senate. Peter, many thanks. Stocks were mixed. The Dow gained 19. The S&P 500 was up 1. NASDAQ lost 17. For the week, the Dow and the S&P 500 both gained more than 4 percentage points, and the NASDAQ rose more than 5% for the index's best weekly gain since 2011. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson did his best today to put the U.S. relationship with Turkey back on track. The NATO allies have been sniping at each other for some time, and it appears they have now cleared the air. Correspondent Rich Edson has the latest from the State Department tonight. Good evening, Rich.
Hey, good evening, Mike. And Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, after several hours of meetings with Turkey's president and foreign minister, says the 2 countries have agreed to work through their differences. At issue, United States support of Kurdish forces in Syria. The U.S. partners with them to fight ISIS. Turkey claims they're terrorists and last month launched an offensive against them. The U.S. and Turkey say they're establishing a working group to address these issues.
We find ourselves at a bit of a crisis point in the relationship. The relationship is too important. It's too valuable to NATO and our NATO allies. It's too valuable to the American people. It's too valuable to the Turkish people for us to not do anything other than concentrate on how are we going forward.
And there are differences beyond Syria. Turkey wants the United States to extradite a Pennsylvania-based cleric it holds responsible for a coup attempt in 2016. The U.S. objects to growing authoritarianism within Turkey, and just this morning, a Turkish court sentenced 6 journalists to life in prison in connection with that 2016 coup attempt. Mike?
Rich Edson live at the State Department. Rich, many thanks. Up next, we go back to South Florida for an update on the shooting investigation and remember some of the victims. Our top story at the bottom of the hour, the FBI admits it failed to follow up on a tip last month that Florida high school shooter Nicholas Cruz was planning an attack. The Justice Department says it is launching an investigation. Florida Republican Governor Rick Scott is calling on FBI Director Christopher Wray to resign. The first funerals for the victims were held today. Tonight we're learning more about some of them. Senior correspondent Rick Leventhal is at Broward Health North in Pompano Beach tonight.
Mourners gather at the Star of David Memorial Gardens in North Lauderdale to remember and bury one of the youngest victims of Wednesday's Florida high school shooting. Alyssa Al-Hadef was just 14 years old, a student and soccer player, a bright light lost forever.
Alyssa's so smart, beautiful, creative, outgoing. She always wants to go to the next event, the next activity. She loved everybody, trusted everybody. She was an amazing soccer player.
Let's continue to pray every day, every night.
Thursday night, thousands gathered for a vigil near the high school, holding candles and signs, many openly sobbing as the names of the victims were read. Speakers included the father of 14-year-old Jamie Guttenberg.
Jamie was such a special kid. All of the kids here are.
What is unfathomable is Jamie took a bullet and is dead. I don't know what I do next. My wife is home. We are broken.
Freshman Haley Betancourt, who heard the gunfire Wednesday, spoke to Martha McCallum after attending the vigil.
I was crying the whole time, but it was really hard to take in because you hear all your friends' names, and then I lost 8 friends.
3 of the dead were teachers or coaches, including Aaron Feiss, who worked with the football team and as a security guard, being remembered as a hero for using his body to shield students from the bullets.
It's actually really hard to talk about Coach right now. The hardest part will be driving through the front gates and not seeing Coach Feiss sitting there, giving me a thumbs up or making me stop to roll the window down and saying that, you know, he cares about me or have a good day at school or get my stuff done because I'm a knucklehead or something like that.
Meanwhile, at this very moment, Mike, the president's motorcade is arriving here at Broward Health North Medical Center. We're told that the president and first lady will be meeting with doctors and other health professionals here who help save lives. There are 3 victims still being treated here at Broward Health North, 2 in fair condition, 1 in critical, but that patient said to be improving. 3 other shooting victims are still recovering at Broward Medical in Fort Lauderdale. 1 was released from there earlier today, Mike, the son of a sheriff's deputy who is said to be recovering and healing from this point on at home. Again, the president arriving here at Broward Health at this moment to meet with doctors and other medical health care professionals. Mike?
Rick Leventhal live in Pompano Beach tonight. Rick, many thanks. In tonight's Whatever Happened To segment, federal government property not being used but costing taxpayers billions of dollars. Special report viewer Jock Banks asked whatever happened to the 32,000 vacant government buildings just sitting empty. Tonight, correspondent Doug McKelway has some answers.
You can't get your job done. You have 124 properties out of 14,000 properties. This is one property that I don't care if it's a Republican or a Democrat administration, if it's this administration or previous administrations, the job is not getting done.
Almost 6 years ago, Republican Congressman Jeff Denham brought a General Services Administration official into this vacant, musty old government building in prime Washington real estate and skewered him over delays in selling it and as many as 77,000 other vacant or underutilized government properties across the country. It was one example of how Washington, ungoverned by market forces, bogs down initiative and swallows, in this case, $2 billion of taxpayer money. The explanation is complex. The government lacks reliable data to measure how many unused buildings it owns. There are costly environmental requirements, competing stakeholder interests, limited accessibility of some properties, and a complex disposal process. Take, for example, St. Elizabeth's, built before the Civil War, as what was then called a hospital for the insane.
There are over 60 buildings here, most of them unoccupied, on more than 180 acres, and it's very easy to see why it's so difficult to sell them. The occupying federal agency has to offer it to another federal agency, and if they're not interested, it then has to be offered to a homeless organization. If they're not interested, it must be offered to a state government or to a local government, and if they're not interested, it then goes on the market, a process which can take several years.
And a lot of our portfolio is 40, 50 years old. Do you try to make it more attractive to a private buyer, or do you just sit and maintain it?
Jeff Denham, that angry congressman from 6 years ago, is less angry now.
Pass H.R. 4465 as amended.
In 2016, Congress passed FASTA, the Federal Asset Sale and Transfer Act, that expedites the sale of unused federal properties. Congress still needs to confirm the 7-person board that will oversee the sales.
We want to see this new board put in place so we get rid of all of these different delays from different agencies holding up the sale of these properties. If it's sitting vacant and unutilized, then let's sell them immediately.
Under FASTA, the GSA has now digitized a database of more than 300,000 federal assets, including unused properties, a first step in draining this particular swamp. In Washington, Doug McKelway, Fox News.
Our Doug McKelway reporting right now in Florida. President Trump and the First Lady have arrived at the hospital. We are monitoring their movements at this moment. We will bring you the latest details when we come back.
grand jury in the District of Columbia today returned an indictment presented by the Special Counsel's Office. The indictment charges 13 Russian nationals and 3 Russian companies for committing federal crimes while seeking to interfere in the United States political system, including the 2016 presidential election, with the stated goal of spreading distrust towards the candidates and the political system in general. Now, there is no allegation in this indictment that any American was a knowing participant in this illegal activity. There is no allegation in the indictment that the charged conduct altered the outcome of the 2016 election.
A rocking news day here in Washington on a Friday. Let's bring in our panel. Byron York, chief political correspondent of the Washington Examiner. Marie Harf is a former spokeswoman at the State Department, and Matt Schlapp, contributor with The Hill. Gentlemen, lady, good evening.
Hello.
Your reaction to what you heard there, these indictments today?
It's rather shocking. Everything about it is shocking. It's shocking to see the Deputy Attorney General, to me, making that announcement. It didn't come specifically from the special counsel's team. It's shocking that what they're saying is that these, it's really interesting. They said these Russians were spreading discord. I know these are serious charges, but that was a strange word it seemed to use.
Right.
It's weird that they said they've been doing it for a number of years, maybe even before this election cycle. It didn't seem like that ingenious a plan to get on Twitter and start to say bad things about Hillary Clinton and other candidates. And I think for a lot of Republicans, they're kind of singing that song. After all of this, is that all there is? And if that really is all there is, the American people are going to want to move on.
Marie, you have a diplomatic background.
Yeah.
How surprised were you by what you heard today?
Well, I don't think that's all there is. I think this is the latest round, and it's clear that Bob Mueller is pulling a lot of different threads here. And it really outlines for the American people the extent in this one piece of Russia's disinformation campaign. The American people should be concerned that they may have seen social media posts that were disinformation from Russians, that they may have attended rallies organized by these Russian bots. And I think for a lot of people, it underscores the fact that this is not a hoax. The Russian meddling was real and is real. This week you had the intelligence chiefs up on the Hill saying they're still trying to do this in 2018 and 2020. It is a serious, ongoing threat that needs to be treated that way by the administration.
There's another revelation today that the Russians were so sneaky they were doing events for and against candidate Trump. Take a listen to this.
After the election, the defendants allegedly staged rallies to support the president-elect while simultaneously staging rallies to protest his election. For example, the defendants organized one rally to support the president-elect and another rally to oppose him, both in New York on the same day.
Both in New York on the same day. Byron, your reaction to what you've heard today?
Well, I think actually what Rosenstein just said there supports this idea that that was really twofold: to disrupt our system, to sow discord, and to mess with Hillary Clinton, whom they thought was going to be the president. Mm-hmm. And so there were lesser targets. Bernie Sanders, they wanted to support him, and Jill Stein, they wanted to support her. But again, that was all kind of Hillary focused, just as their support of Trump was. Then the unthinkable happens, Trump wins, and they just begin to disrupt in a different way, putting on 2 rallies in New York, one a pro-Trump rally, and the other is Trump is not my president rally. So I think it just supports the idea that they were just messing with things the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Marie, what do you think their reaction was in Moscow to this?
Well, it's probably not surprising, and none of these people that were charged will ever see a U.S. court. Russia will not extradite them, I don't think. But it's put them on notice. And for a lot of people, part of what's been concerning to some about the fact that President Trump keeps calling this idea that Russia meddled a hoax, right, that he doesn't seem to accept the intelligence community's assessment, is because what they need to be doing right now is planning to prevent it next time. And that testimony this week from the intelligence chiefs should be very stunning to Americans. They are still doing this stuff. And yes, it's just Facebook and Twitter. A lot of Americans get their news from Facebook and Twitter.
This is rather absurd. This is like Rocky and Bullwinkle kind of stuff. When I think of Russian collusion in our elections, I am offended. I think it's repulsive. Is this what it was? It was 13 guys having some rallies.
There's going to be more. This isn't
bots on social. Well, this is clearly their best shot. Acting as bots on social media. Somebody might have read a Facebook post that was incorrect. That's what this was all about. It's repugnant. It shouldn't happen. Obama should have stopped it. But by the same token, this is not worth a year of the country's time over everything else that we have to deal with in this country. And these charges of Russian collusion, it's clearly been ridiculous and not true.
And this was not a surprise either. I mean, the intelligence committees on Capitol Hill have known almost everything that's in this indictment. A lot of it's been actually reported in the press. And remember, there was a huge excitement over the Facebook ads a while back with the intelligence committees, which really added up to very, very little.
Most of them ran after the election.
I want to get to the other bombshell news today regarding the FBI, that they got a tip about this young man and it fell through the cracks. As a dad, I find that particularly devastating. Your reaction to that, Matt?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, law enforcement, they have a tough job. And they're not going to catch every, bad person that wants to do harm in society. That being said, I think this is just not acceptable to the American people to know that these were not just somebody saying something bad about a guy. This is like calling the FBI and telling them chapter and verse on why this person was a threat.
Marie, you've worked at high levels of our government. Does somebody lose their job for this?
Someone probably should. And I don't think it's just one person, though. This has to be a systematic look at how we go about this, because we've always heard, if you see something, say something, right? Absolutely. There are bad people out there, but you go to the FBI because you trust that they will act on it. We need to take a look, top to bottom, at how this was handled. Someone probably should lose their job over this, but we can't just blame it on one person. We need to take a look at this. We need to look at gun laws. We need to look at mental health. All of it in the wake of something like this, because we have to prevent this from happening again.
And for the FBI itself, a lot of Republicans have been very critical of the FBI's handling of highly politicized investigations, the Clinton email investigation, the Trump-Russia investigation, but at the same time praising the work that the FBI does in fighting crime around the country. And to have this horrendous mistake happen is just really bad.
Yeah, a lot of folks behind us on Capitol Hill warning about undermining the FBI, but this is a few at the FBI undermining the agency itself. Next up, the Friday lightning round. This is a Fox News alert. The Associated Press is reporting a major earthquake is shaking buildings in Mexico City right now. Several hundred people were killed in an earthquake in the same area of Mexico in 2017. That's all we know at this time. More details when we get them. And now we are back with our panel, Byron, Marie, and Matt. And so taking us back to the 2012 campaign cycle with Mitt Romney jumping in today. Take a listen to this.
I have decided to run for United States Senate because I believe I can help bring Utah's values and Utah's lessons to Washington.
We don't want government to be so far away from us, so removed from our community. Mitt Romney represents more of that.
And I think there are some people who may have run that won't, based on a Mitt Romney candidacy.
So conventional wisdom in this town is if Mitt Romney gets in, he's going to win. Is he going to win?
I don't know if he's going to win, but I mean, I find this all rather pathetic. He ran for president. He got trounced. A lot of people thought he was going to win. He had a good first debate. But I think it's time for Governor Romney from Massachusetts, maybe future senator from Utah, to just kind of find something else to do. Maybe get a hobby, play golf, learn how to knit, go travel, something else.
He's already being hit with the carpetbagger thing. Marie, your reaction?
Look, I think, and I worked on the campaign against Mitt Romney in 2012. I think Mitt Romney is actually a dedicated public servant, a good person. I suspect he will win. What will be interesting is what kind of candidate he is, and then what kind of senator he is, especially in his relationship with President Trump. They've had this sort of on again, off again. He criticized him during the campaign in 2016. Then he was up for Secretary of State, and they got closer. That will be interesting to watch what role he plays if indeed he wins.
I don't think there's any question he's going to win. I think one question is, why does he want to do this? Yeah. Because he's going to come to Washington. He's going to distance himself from the president because the president dominates everything here. Trump will say something outrageous. He will condemn it, and then he will end up voting with the president 90+% of the time. And I'm not sure exactly why he wants to do that.
I've had a lot of senators come up to me and say they're scratching their heads trying to figure out why he wants the gig. Okay, winners and losers. Byron, start us off.
My winner is Amy Sherald. She is the artist whose portrait of Michelle Obama was unveiled this week. What you didn't hear at the ceremony was that she, at age 31, was diagnosed with heart failure, very, very serious, and in 2012 had a heart transplant. So
Awesome.
she's there, the picture of health and success, and had overcome an enormous number of challenges. My loser is Senator Bob Corker. He made a big show of opposing the president. Remember that? He called the White House adult daycare. And now he made a big show of declining to run for re-election, and now he says he might want to run again, except he would need the support of the adult daycare center.
And Marsha Blackburn's not going anywhere, and she's apparently been talking to the president,
not.
so that's complicated. Marie, your winners and losers?
My winners this week are the U.S. Olympians, but specifically 17-year-old Chloe Kim. She's from California. She won the gold in the women's halfpipe, and she was the first female Olympian to hit back-to-back 1080s, which is a very difficult move in the halfpipe event. And she's just this great character. She's 17. I wasn't winning gold medals at 17. She's just this great Olympian. There's a bunch of other great ones, too. My loser, though, this week are Russian internet bots, to go off our earlier story. You know, they've been put on notice, and they've been named and shamed, which is a tool of diplomacy. And hopefully this administration will be making it harder for them, and Americans will now know to look out for them on the internet. And so this may be the start of really cracking down on some of Russia's internet disinformation behavior. They're my loser of the week.
Matt?
Winner, Kevin Cramer, congressman from North Dakota, who I think will be the next senator from North Dakota as he takes on Heidi Heitkamp. And my loser, I hate to go back to it, my loser, partly because Marie seems to love him so much, would be Mitt Romney. Like I said, I think it's time to find a hobby and to move on and to give someone else a chance.
So Cramer just jumping in today.
That's right.
You think he plays well?
As we're speaking.
In a state that President Trump did well in 2016?
Absolutely. He's won by double digits. He's very popular. Obviously, it's an at-large House race, so he runs statewide every time. I think Heidi Heitkamp has something to be nervous about.
All right. Stay tuned. Another winner of the week, our own Bret Baier. Last night, the National Press Foundation honored Bret with the group's 2017 Sol Tayshoff Award for Excellence in Broadcast Journalism.
Journalism is fundamentally under attack, rhetorically being bombarded every day, and that means we as journalists have to be on our game even more. Push back, push for transparency, dig, ask tough questions, but also listen. Listen first to all sides.
You can see the program on Twitter at Bret Baier or on Facebook at facebook.com/BretBaierSR. I was there last night. It was a great event. Well deserved, Bret. We're all proud of you. When we come back, notable quotables.